Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're unpacking a really fascinating judgment from the Constitutional Court back in 2006. It's case CCT 18/6. At its core, this is a pretty intense story about a 28-year Muslim marriage that literally hit a massive, unyielding legal wall. We're going to explore exactly how the highest court in the land approaches complex constitutional questions and why, sometimes, strict rules of procedure can just completely stop a case dead in its tracks.
Think about the core mystery here for a second. How exactly does a wife who is just seeking her fair share after nearly 3 decades of marriage get completely denied by the highest court? And what's really captivating about this is that she wasn't denied because the court necessarily disagreed with her fundamental rights. No, she was denied based purely on strict legal procedure.
Section 1. The 28-year marriage. Let's dive into the actual facts and the critical timeline of this long-term relationship.
To really grasp this legal battle, we first have to understand the human timeline. So their journey starts with their marriage way back in 1974. Fast forward 28 years, and the marriage ends in 2002. This triggers an absolute cascade of legal events. We get a Cape High Court judgment in February 2004, a Supreme Court of Appeal refusal in July 2004, and then finally a constitutional court request in April 2006. Now notice that massive timeline gap between 2004 and 2006. Keep that in mind, because we are absolutely going to dissect that later, and it ends up being incredibly important.
Let's zoom in on that 2002 endpoint. The marriage officially ended when the husband issued an irrevocable talaq. In Muslim personal law, this is basically an act or deed that firmly confirms a divorce. But here's the absolutely critical legal context for this case. At no stage during those 28 years was a civil marriage ever concluded between them under South African common law. So when that talaq was issued, the union was terminated, leaving the wife to navigate the fallout without any of the standard legal safety nets of a common law civil marriage.
Section 2. The universal partnership claim. Let's see what happened next.
Right after the abrupt end of the marriage, the applicant headed straight to the Cape High Court. She was looking for a division of property and 12 months of rehabilitative maintenance. But, well, how do you claim a share of property when your marriage actually isn't legally recognized under civil common law? You have to get a bit creative with your legal strategy. Her core argument here rested on this concept of a universal partnership. She argued that a tacit universal partnership had existed during their entire Muslim marriage, essentially making them partners in a joint estate, which she believed legally entitled her to a half share of his property.
Unfortunately for her, the Cape High Court ruled strictly on the evidence that was actually presented to it. The court basically held that she simply hadn't established that this tacit universal partnership existed during the marriage. On top of that, the court noted that her secondary claim for the 12 months of rehabilitative maintenance was just completely abandoned. So she lost in the High Court based directly on the facts and the specific evidence she brought forward.
Section 3. The constitutional question. This is where things get a major twist.
After the Supreme Court of Appeal refused her leave to appeal, and they did so without even providing reasons, she realized she needed a completely new angle to bring this all the way to the highest court. We're talking a massive shift in legal tactics here. Acknowledging she totally hadn't pleaded constitutional issues originally, she now argued that the High Court should have, proactively, on its own initiative, developed the common law using the equality and dignity provisions of the Constitution.
She made the case that if the High Court had taken this broader, constitutional approach, it would have, quote, enlarged the concept of tacit universal partnership to embrace her situation as a divorced Muslim wife. She was essentially asking the Constitutional Court to look right past her original, much narrower argument and instead apply a wide constitutional lens to legally protect her specific, vulnerable situation.
Section 4. Why the court said no. Let's get into the court's reasoning. Now, the Constitutional Court definitely acknowledged in its judgment that the recognition of Muslim marriages and the consequences of divorce are incredibly important, highly complex issues. They touch on a huge range of interests. Yet, they still completely shut the door on her case. Why? Well, the first fatal procedural flaw was right there in the paperwork. The broader constitutional issues simply were not raised on the pleadings or even argued in the lower court. The High Court had done its job correctly by dealing with the matter exactly according to the pleadings and the evidence presented at the time. In the legal system, you generally just can't suddenly change the entire foundational premise of your argument on appeal.
Second, the court addressed her request for direct access on these massive constitutional issues. The court firmly stated that, unless there are exceptional circumstances, it really shouldn't be the court of first instance for matters of this magnitude. I mean, think about who else this affects.
the relevant government minister, religious organizations, the Commission for Gender Equality. The court pointed out that a huge number of interested bodies absolutely must be given an opportunity to be heard if such broad societal and legal issues are going to be tackled. You simply can't rewrite the rules around marriage and divorce in a vacuum.
And then there was the final nail in the coffin. It's a huge number, 20. Let's see what that means.
Remember that timeline we looked at earlier? The Supreme Court of Appeal refused her application in July 2004, but the applicant didn't actually lodge her request for leave to appeal to the Constitutional Court until April 2006. That is an extremely lengthy delay of 20 whole months. She actually had to apply for an order just to get the court to condone her non-compliance with the strict time limits for noting an appeal. The court was very clear that this severe delay seriously compounded the other procedural flaws we just talked about.
So, because of the failure to plead those constitutional issues initially, the total lack of input from crucial stakeholders, and that massive 20 months delay, the court concluded it would just not be in the interests of justice to grant the application. It was unanimously refused by the Constitutional Court justices. The applicant's constitutional arguments were completely halted behind an unyielding procedural wall. As a very small silver lining, the court decided this wasn't an appropriate matter for cost to be awarded, so she was at least spared that financial hit.
Which leaves us with an incredibly compelling final thought. This case perfectly illustrates the real-world friction between a potentially vulnerable individual seeking justice and the rigid scaffolding of the law. So how do we balance the urgent need to protect individuals with the strict legal procedures, like accurate pleadings, stakeholder involvement, and strict timelines that are designed to uphold the stability of our entire democratic system? It is a really tough question, and as case CCT 18/06 shows us, sometimes procedure absolutely gets the final word. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this gave you a clear window into how our highest courts navigate these really difficult boundaries. Catch you next time.